She always knew the world around her was tightening, but she never imagined how quietly a cage could be built, how soft words could become invisible bars, and how expectations could shape themselves into walls. It began with small corrections, gentle reminders of who she was supposed to be. At first, she brushed them off, believing she could remain herself while still pleasing everyone around her. But little by little, those reminders grew into warnings. And those warnings hardened into rules that left no space for her dreams. She was told to lower her voice, to contain her fire, to shrink her ambition so it wouldn't look like rebellion. They said it with smiles sometimes, with disappointment other times, but the message was always the same: fit the mold or be crushed by it. She tried to obey, believing compliance would bring peace, but instead, it drained her. Her world grew smaller as she folded pieces of herself to fit into the version they demanded. She stopped questioning, stopped dreaming, stopped fighting. The cage was never forced on her. She was guided into it, made to believe it was where she belonged. And by the time she realized what had happened, the bars were already solid around her, built not of iron, but of guilt, fear, and carefully crafted limitations. Yet inside her, something refused to go silent. A small ember of the girl she used to be, curious, fierce, unafraid, still glowed, even as the walls pressed closer. That ember kept pulsing, reminding her that she was not born to live in confinement. She didn't know how to escape, didn't know where to run, didn't even know if she had the strength to resist. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The cage might have been built around her, but it did not define her. Something inside her was still alive, waiting for its moment to ignite. She first noticed the cracks on a quiet evening when the world outside seemed to breathe, while she felt suffocated within her own thoughts. She caught sight of her reflection, eyes dull, shoulders heavy, and something inside her stirred, almost angrily. That wasn't the girl she used to be. Once she held dreams so vast, they could barely fit inside her heart. But now she lived in a space so small she could hardly breathe. That realization struck her harder than any scolding, harder than any judgment she had endured. It was the moment she understood that she had become a shadow of herself, shaped not by who she was, but by who they wanted her to be. The cracks spread from that one truth. She began noticing the lies she had accepted, that her silence was strength, that obedience was love, that shrinking herself was necessary for harmony. Each lie she confronted chipped away at the limitations around her. She started taking small steps toward reclaiming herself, steps that seemed insignificant, but carried the weight of rebellion. She began writing again, filling pages with thoughts she had been afraid to speak. She listened to the music she used to love, letting the rhythm remind her of the freedom she once felt. She allowed herself to dream again, even if the dreams were quiet at first. With every small act of defiance, the cage around her trembled. She felt her spirit stretch in ways it hadn't in years. And though she feared the consequences of pushing back, she feared the cost of staying still even more. The cracks became larger every day, letting in slivers of light she had forgotten existed. She didn't break the cage in one powerful moment. She weakened it with each truth she reclaimed. Every question she dared to ask was another strike against the walls holding her captive. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hope rising. The breaking point arrived on a day that looked ordinary from the outside, yet carried the weight of every unspoken hurt she had swallowed over the years. They stood around her, voices sharp, telling her once again that she was ungrateful, unreasonable, too emotional, too ambitious, too much. They tried to convince her that her dreams were foolish, that her strength was arrogance, that her independence was rebellion meant to shame them. Their words were meant to cut her back down into the shape they preferred, a shape small enough to control. But instead of shrinking, she felt something inside her snap back into place, as though a truth, long forgotten, had suddenly returned to claim its space, that no matter how much she tried to please them, it would never be enough. The more she gave, the more they demanded. The quieter she became, the louder their criticism grew. And in that moment, she understood that they weren't protecting her by limiting her. They were protecting their comfort, threatened by her potential. That realization was the spark that ignited the fire she had suppressed for too long. She didn't burst out in anger. Her transformation was quieter, deeper, more powerful. She stood tall, lifted her chin, and looked them in the eyes with a strength they had never seen in her before. She didn't shout. She didn't defend herself. She simply refused to break. Her silence this time was not submission. It was defiance. A declaration that she no longer accepted their version of who she should be. That silent refusal shattered the cage more violently than any scream could have. In that moment, she reclaimed herself. The fear that once controlled her dissolved, replaced by a fierce certainty that she deserved more than the life they carved out for her. She did not just feel the cage crack, she felt it collapse. And for the first time in years, she breathed freely. Walking away from the cage was not a dramatic escape, but a long, unsteady journey. One she had to take step by trembling step. Freedom did not greet her with open arms. It tested her, challenged her, and at times frightened her more than the confinement she left behind. She had spent so long being told what to think, how to act, and who to be, that the world outside felt too vast, almost overwhelming. But she refused to turn back. Every step forward was a promise to herself that she would never again shrink to fit into someone else's comfort. She began rebuilding her life quietly. She explored the dreams she once buried, touching them gently, as though afraid they would crumble under the weight of reality. Some she pursued with urgency, others she approached slowly, learning again what it meant to choose for herself. She made mistakes, many of them. There were days when memories of the cage tugged at her ankles, whispering that she wasn't strong enough, that she wasn't ready, that freedom was too heavy to carry. On those days, she felt herself falter, tempted to slip back into the familiarity of limitation. But each time she stumbled, she reminded herself why she left. She remembered the suffocation, the silence, the aching loneliness of living a life that wasn't her own. With that memory guiding her, she found the strength to keep going. New people came into her life, some who inspired her, some who challenged her, and some who simply offered kindness without asking her to change. Slowly, she learned to trust herself again, to rely on her own judgment, to believe in her own voice. The journey wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and with every step she took, the world grew a little wider, a little brighter, a little safer. She wasn't just leaving the cage behind. She was building a life too expansive for any cage to contain again. By the time she looked back at the cage, it no longer held the power it once had over her. What had once been walls of fear, control, and doubt now seemed small, almost laughable, in comparison to the life she had built beyond them. She had walked through fire, faced the echoes of every limitation they imposed, and emerged stronger, sharper, and more alive than she had ever been. The girl who had once trembled at criticism, who had once doubted her own worth, had transformed into a woman who carried herself with quiet authority and unshakable confidence. The cage had not broken her. It had shown her how unbreakable she truly was. She realized that surviving the cage was only the beginning. Beyond survival lay the full scope of her power, the freedom to speak her truth, to chase her dreams, to live without apology. Every choice she made now reflected her own desires, not the expectations of others. She felt a fierce joy in being the author of her own story, and in that joy was a profound understanding. Those who tried to confine her had unwittingly made her stronger. Their attempts to limit her only revealed the depth of her resilience. But her transformation was not only personal. She became a beacon for others trapped in cages of their own. She spoke, not to lecture, but to ignite courage in those who had been silenced. She shared her story, not for sympathy, but to show that survival could evolve into triumph. The light that had once been hidden inside her now shone brightly, reaching beyond herself, touching the lives of those still finding their way. She survived the cage they built for her. Yes, but more than that, she soared. She had turned confinement into a lesson, limitation into fuel, and fear into flight. In the end, the cage that had tried to define her became the very thing that revealed her boundless strength. She did not just live, she thrived.